Hello, everyone. My name is John Lewandowski. I am the founder and CEO of Podclass Pro. We are a premier language learning service that prioritizes your needs of learning a foreign language and of education through immersive language training. And what that means, and we'll get into that a little bit in the further of this podcast, is that we take your casual conversational interests. We take what you know about your target language. We morph that into a class that best serves your interests. We help you achieve your goals rapidly. We help expand your horizons, open new doors, and help you level up. We're big believers in the classical education here. We had many of the greats throughout history's very big bounty of knowledge take classes with coaches, with teachers, with tutors, and almost
Aristotle and
everything.
Alexander the Great, for example.
Exactly. And almost everything that they learned and that they did in the rest of their lives, they credit directly towards that private coaching. So through taking the classical era of immersing yourself in a subject, in this case, languages, or in the future subjects, bringing it to the modern age will help you smash your goals. Joining me today on this podcast is Podclass Steve, a very good friend of mine. Steve Trail over here was the first English teacher that we brought forward. We met in college, worked together, and we're building this new reformed education. And before we begin, we want a little bit of a mission statement. Now, Podclass Pro, as many of you probably seen on the website and Twitter, on the YouTube, as well as on the Instagram, which is just Podclass Pro, is tomorrow's alternative, today's solution. We are trying to change things around away from the cookie cutter mentality of a lot of what modern education, at least here in the West and in America, uses as a model. Our actual little internal dialogue when it comes to a bit of a catchphrase that we use is relatively straightforward. Now, there's an old saying at common law: work while they party, learn while they sleep, and of course, live like they dream. That describes Podclass Pro in a nutshell. We will have different podcasts based on the podcast at any time, anywhere, in any subject, at any day, so that we can help you achieve your goals. Whether that's through one-on-one training, a course, or through the signature pod class of a group of people, 3, 5, 10, 15, even 20 people, we'll get you to hit those goals to learn all you can. So, without further ado, I want to turn it over to Steve. So, Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did we get here? Why Podclass Pro?
I am an English degree holder with a minor in communications from the same college I met you, John. And at this college, during the time when the world shut down,
Everything went to
we had
Zoom.
nothing. Yeah, classes went right to Zoom, but conversations stayed in the living room. And we had conversations every night for like 2, 3 hours. There was nothing to do but talk. And during these conversations, we noticed a interesting phenomenon with our friend who was from another country and learning English. His English was not good when we started these, but through participation every night, just talking about random subjects, being fully immersed in the English language on a conversational level, not a classroom level, his English improved very remarkably and very quickly. And now he's a salesman and he's making phone calls and selling products. And clearly he's learned enough English to be able to speak clearly enough to do that through this immersive method that we kind of accidentally discovered.
Absolutely. And to add that, our friend, who eventually is going to be on the podcast, we have him scheduled as a guest, is now quoting ancient Greek philosophers, which to me, at the very least, is very impressive. Coming from a guy that learned English through TV shows back in the day and kind of sort of when I first met him, couldn't put forward a complete sentence without many pauses or questions about how to, I don't know, I guess, shape what he's trying to say, which, as a teacher, completely proud of that. We had a student go from English to, as Steve said, making sales calls, making money in a career that requires you to be able to speak in your target language, in this case, English, fluently. He's able to do that. He's able to read these ancient documents, find the knowledge that Steve and I treasure, and bring it to today's world. He's able to talk about that, which is nothing short of a miracle. As for my experience, I want to say since 2018, 2019, I've been an English coach to many different people across the world. And it's been a very rewarding experience because the people that you run into, they're part of your network for the rest of your life. They're a part of the people that you can count on as friends. I've seen people grow up. I've seen people get married. I've seen people buy their first house, have their first child, get a new job, their life change. And the added benefit to that is they were able to speak a new language. They were to learn things about the world around them from someone else, from a different perspective, from a different culture, from a different country. They were to grow as a person and develop, something that could not be found within the cookie cutter world. And as Steve mentioned, when the world shut down 3 years ago, 4 years ago at this point, feels like an eternity away, and things changed forever, there was nothing to do but talk. And all of our courses that we had were online. And the cookie cutter method didn't work. So, Steve, why don't you tell us about immersion training? Why immersion training as your form of education? Why not the Zoom calls that we sat on for hours at a time, listening to a teacher talk with hundreds of other people on a PowerPoint slide? Did you retain any info from that? I don't think I did.
No, I did not. In fact, very much the opposite. I kind of was turned off from learning. And, immersive learning sounds like this crazy new concept that we're capitalizing on, but it's kind of the opposite. It's ancient. It didn't even have a name because that's just what it was back then. Um,
It was
when you
just your
have,
schooling. That's all it was.
yeah,
But
yeah,
we're going back to that point
yeah,
and saying, maybe the ancients had a point here. We're bringing
yeah,
this to a modern audience and
yeah.
building something beautiful from it to help you achieve any of your goals.
And firstly, we're applying that to immersive language learning, and this incorporates learning a language in the most natural way possible. Traditionally, in this modern age, this would mean moving to the country where the language you wish to learn is spoken. But naturally, this is quite inconvenient for most learners and is typically done only by rich tourists or people moving to a foreign country for business reasons. Um, but it still goes to show that interacting with native language speakers is the most important aspect of immersive learning. And this is why language majors in college are required to study abroad. You have to do it because you need to get that firsthand experience. However, it can also be done without the physical travel requirement, thanks to the internet and online coaching. Not in the form of a lecture, but as a sit down, a conversation, a podcast. It's very participation based. It's not lecture based. This method of language learning removes the artificial barriers that are put in place by cookie cutter instruction, which is comparably inefficient to that of immersive learning. To prove my point, research shows that even short-term foreign language immersion will stimulate language learning. 20 years ago, the Department of Defense acknowledged its own inadequacy in the foreign language proficiency and cultural awareness categories. Operation Enduring Freedom necessitated improvements in acquiring and maintaining language skills. The primary reason for previous failures in this area stemmed from the fact that languages cannot be taught in a government memo. To address this issue, the DoD created a roadmap that fostered robust foreign language experience amongst agents, soldiers, and interpreters. And one of these people was a friend of mine who is now retired. But he was tasked with surveying the local scenes of foreign countries and meeting the local populations and learning about them. He would go to a bar, knowing nothing of their language except the phrase, "How do you say?" And then he would point to an object or a word. After an hour, he had enough vocabulary to construct basic sentences. And after 2 weeks, he could communicate effectively with anyone from that country. Not perfectly, but enough. By the time he retired, he was fluent in 7 languages and
Wow.
was passable in many others. Um, Keep in mind that to reach a comparable efficiency in just one language via the classroom method would take hundreds of hours and cost you a lot of money. Um, and the classroom must cater to an entire audience instead of one-on-one instruction. So feedback is significantly less frequent than the organic, immersive way of learning languages, where you can just correct someone on the fly and tell them how to improve. Um,
Absolutely.
in, yeah. In addition, one's language skills outside of a classroom will deteriorate because they never have to rely on the language to interact with their environment. In a 1991 study, which the full study is cited on our blog if you want to read it for yourself, researchers found that the language aptitude tests demonstrated advancements in language reading proficiencies, but found no noteworthy increase in speaking or listening improvements, which shows the difference between knowing a language and speaking a language. You can know a language from taking a class in high school, but then you'll forget and you don't know how to speak it because you never had to speak it with a local or an expert. Immersive language learning is quite simple. There are no levels of study, no 4-year commitments, or even homework for that matter. The language lesson is the use of language itself, and Podclass Pro is fully positioned to utilize the style of learning in an online space. Back to you, John.
At most, when it came to assigning homework for people who wanted a bit of extra practice, I always jokingly ask, do you have Netflix? Do you have YouTube? Yeah, great. Go find a video and let's say I was teaching primarily English. Go find a video in English. Now, let's shoot for 30 seconds. Okay, put the subtitles on, read, watch, 30 seconds. Now take the subtitles off, rewatch that 30 seconds. And then every day increase by 15, 20, 30 seconds. People learn that way. They saw the media, they saw the words, they heard it, they saw the situations it's utilized in, and they applied that forward. I liked that story about your friend who would go to who knows where and only know, hey, how do you say this? Como se dice? Kako se kaže? Czy to mówisz po polsku? Basically, it's the most rudimentary form of learning, but it's the one that works. Now, when I was growing up, for 12 years, I went through the American education system to learn a foreign language. I was required in elementary and middle school for 8 years to learn Spanish. And then for 4 years in high school was required to learn French. I could have chosen Spanish, French, or Italian, but my experiences in the cookie cutter education of elementary and middle school turned me away from Spanish because I thought maybe the teachers would be better. Now, the main issue I had with the elementary and middle school teaching of Spanish was there was 35 of us in the class. There's one teacher, super sweet lady, knew what she was doing, but there were so many of us. And many of us had varying degrees of knowledge of Spanish. A lot of kids had parents either from Spain or Latin America that knew either a bunch of Spanish or were already fluent. Then you had us Eastern Europeans, I'm of Polish descent, that did not grow up learning Spanish, grew up learning English and a bit of Polish. So learning a Romance language to us was something completely foreign. Then you had people that just grew up learning English, which is a hybrid of Romance and Germanic tongues, but at the same time, there's very little similarities. So balancing a wide range of people in one cookie cutter class, 35 people with a wide range of abilities on this current language must have made her job incredibly tough. And I learned the basics, the very rudimentary basics for 8 years. And honestly, I came out of that not being able to speak, but maybe read something and get some sort of meaning from it. And I went to high school. I learned French, and French was very difficult. And again, it was a similar result. There were people of a wide variety of backgrounds in terms of linguistic quality and ability. And having for one teacher to balance based on what New York State, where we're from, gives them is difficult. Because in high school, to graduate, at least in New York, your third year out of the fourth, you have to have a foreign language exam. So unfortunately, that means a lot of teachers will eventually start teaching towards the exam because that's what's important, that's what's necessary. Don't blame them. There's 35 people in a class. It's very difficult to meet everybody's needs. I walked away 12 years later, very disappointed because I knew people in my life that were polyglots. They were able to speak any language that they wanted to, or they had a language at their house that they spoke. And I was jealous of that. So I wanted to find a new way to show people that you can learn from the cookie cutter method, but we're going to make it more efficient. We're going to hit those goals. We're going to get you speaking in things that are not just for an exam, but will set you for life. Not for school, but for life. That's how we're going here. Through teaching people through casual conversation and immersion, I was able to get people up to speed in the English language. I pioneered this technique through learning of Polish. Now, granted, because life has thrown its different bends in our paths recently, my Polish has slipped a little bit. However, it's still pretty good. In terms of speaking Polish, which is one of the hardest languages that you could actually learn, I learned through immersion. I did what your friend did, Steve. Essentially, I made Polish friends that already spoke the language. Oh, how do you say this? How do you say that? Learn vocabulary, put it all together, immerse
Suddenly, it's
myself in
not
the
so
culture.
hard, right?
Suddenly, it's not
You're
so
learning
hard.
it through the most
Suddenly,
basic and effective way you can. I bet if I went to China right now, I could learn Mandarin in 1 or 2 years, which is everyone says is the hardest language. But if you have no option but to learn it, then you're going to learn it.
suddenly the pieces fall together.
Yeah.
And I have to say, to your credit, like you had mentioned before, with moving to another country for business and bringing the family and inadvertently learning another language. I spent 3 weeks in Poland after I graduated high school. I have to say, my level of Polish was here before I went. It was there by the time I got back. So the language immersion of Podclass Pro works. And to wrap it up, I have to say, who we're looking for is young professionals, CEOs, travelers, expats, and hobbyists. Those who are looking to open up new doors in their life, to learn a foreign language, to build something more. We're all here. If you want to learn through a classical way of learning an education, join Podclass Pro. You want to link with a group of people that are like-minded with similar goals, join Podclass Pro. You want to help people learn a foreign language, whether that be your language or a hobby of yours, join Podclass Pro. You want to put a foot forward towards your future, have a new marketable skill, be able to do business elsewhere, to travel, to see the world, to experience this beautiful thing we call life. Podclass Pro is your place. We will affirm that for you. We will build something for you, regardless of what your level is, at any time, anywhere. There's going to be a teacher waiting for you. All you have to do is take your first step forward. And if you'd love to teach and you'd love to share your passion of learning, education, your culture, your values, your way of life, and the way that you look at things, feel free to apply to teach. Talk to you for a little bit. We'll go from there. So, Steve, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for all the help that you've given us. I have to say, we're looking forward to this great future. Podclass Pro is going to be the future. I say that with a smile on my face because I know this works. I've done it for myself. I've helped countless people. Steve and I had personal one-on-one experience with an individual every day for 3 years, and that man's life changed like you wouldn't believe. We're going to have him on the show soon. We're going to have a nice little conversation. You guys will see what a success Podclass Pro can be for you. So, Steve, any final words?
My final words are we're looking forward to working with you and working for you. And
Absolutely.
thank you for having me on the show, John. I can't wait for the next one.
Steve, would you agree with this statement? Don't be like Big Ed. Book your first pod class instead.
I absolutely agree. And I can already imagine the benefits.
Reject the cookie cutter model. Embrace our tradition. We will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for listening in. It's been a pleasure. Take
Have a
care.
good one.